the work of an Iowa-based organization, Bailing Out Benji, kind of helped spark this investigation. Can you tell me about that?
That resolution filed in King County Superior Court requires the company to pay the state $3.75 million with interest.
Bailing Out Benji regularly looks through these records of dogs' movement from state to state.
Bailing Out Benji
played a key part in unraveling a nationwide puppy scheme.
Bailing Out Benji,
an organization that's been working across the country to stop the pipeline of puppy mill breeders.
Bailing Out Benji.
I will use my voice because they don't have one, and I will keep doing it until there are no more puppy mill dogs. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to this week's episode of Truth, Lies, and Puppy Mills. Alexis, Kristen, and I are going to talk about legislation and laws and kind of what works and what doesn't work. And we're not coming at it from an angle of telling you what to do or what not to do. We kind of want to show some perspectives of what has worked and what may not work as effectively as we thought in the past. So, yeah. Obviously, a lot of our listeners love policy and legislation, and we've been super active in it. So what if we chat a little bit first about some of the ways that we've been active in policy?
Yeah. Well, I mean, something that we always tell people when we explain like what Bailing Out Benji is, what we do is that we like to say that our research is used from classrooms to policy rooms. And so we do have individuals, organizations, our volunteers, they come to us so that they have research to kind of back up when they're talking to legislators, not only at the state or federal level, but to like their city councils as well, their localities. So I guess that's where our research factors in.
No, you're totally fine. We have worked on city council stuff.
Yes.
We have helped on the county level in certain cases where there's a county ordinance. Oh my gosh, I can't even talk today either. We've worked on state level stuff, and we've even been a part of national lobby days at the federal level. Yes. Where we have been able to, talk to our federal lawmakers. So us as an admin team and our volunteers have really been hands-on in all types of policy. Mm-hmm. And so we were going to kind of, like I said, talk about the most popular types of laws people are working on or efforts people are working on, and then what we see from the data side.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, if we just want to dive right in, probably the one that most people I think are familiar with right now are those retail bans. Whether it's they're passing an ordinance so that they get a retail ban at the local level, or the really big ones where they pass one at the state level. I think that's the most popular legislation work, but also the most that we might have the most to say about right now as the research people seeing kind of the behind the scenes of what's happening because of retail bans. So I don't know if we want to dive right into that.
Are you going to ask what a retail ban is?
Did I look like I had a question? I know. I was like, well, I mean, yeah, it's kind of self-explanatory, but honestly, what does that mean? So for me, this conversation is interesting because I see people saying we need to pass laws. Mm-hmm. We need to have a ban. We need to do this, like ban pet stores, or what does that mean does that mean shut down the pet store? Does that mean just get them to stop selling? So when you talk about a retail ban, what mm-hmm. typically does that look like when a community passes a retail ban?
Yeah. Wow. Well, I guess it kind of looks like it is that they're trying to stop what they say is the puppy mill pipeline into a state. And I think that a lot of organizations and people think that pet stores are the main way that puppy mills are entering their state. And so how they see it is that they're trying to pass a ban on no retail sale of cats and dogs in pet stores. It also includes rabbits sometimes as well, but it is basically trying to tell pet stores that they can only source puppies from rescues or adoption places. So it's more of an adoption rather than a sale. And so that's what that retail ban is it's stopping that retail sale of pets in pet stores.
And for years, and it's still kind of used in this field, but we are saying the word ban. That was we never wanted to use that word for a long time. It was very strategic to not say bans. So the phrase is humane ordinance. And when I said the word to you earlier, Kristen, I was like, yeah, California is technically the first state to go humane. You were like, well, what does humane mean?
Right. I mean, I know what humane means, but what does it mean
In
for a
that
state to go humane?
Yeah.
And so this is why they didn't, people don't like the word ban because that's what it is actually doing.
Yeah.
But when we're saying the word humane, we're only talking about a store that sources from puppy mills. And so we're calling them inhumane. So when you're passing a humane ordinance, that means a store will no longer be partnering with commercial dog breeders or puppy mills to sell products to puppies and kittens.
Does it typically say, so like you made the comment, like you can't sell cats or dogs, you can partner with a local rescue or shelter and have adoptions, but you can't sell. So a ban isn't differentiating between puppy mill and breeder. It's just saying you may not sell a dog from a breeder.
Yeah.
Yes.
Period.
Yeah, that could
Okay.
factor into it too, that for a long time, we've talked about in other episodes, like pet stores source mostly from puppy mills, or pet stores are known to be, that breeders that sell to pet stores are puppy mills. So it comes down to like, oh, we're not differentiating a lot. So I think that has been what's been taken into account when we're like, oh, we're going to do a retail ban because puppy mills sell here and this is how we stop them. Like,
and does that tie into that narrative that basically all breeders are puppy mills? Yeah, so if it's a commercial breeder, and you're selling to a pet store, by definition, you're a puppy mill, where we make the distinction, like, no, it's how you are running your organization that determines whether you're a puppy mill or not.
And so to your point earlier, which is kind of, I would say this is the first thing that caused us to be like, maybe this is weird.
Yeah.
So you were saying like the differentiation is essentially now you can sell rescue and shelter dogs. So we're going to look at California because they were the first state to pass a huge bill. And everyone famously knows what has been happening in California.
Not everyone.
Not everyone, right? I know. People who follow us know that it's like, God, bailing out Benji will not stop talking about California all of a sudden. But when the ban went into place, it caused all of the pet stores in California to, quote, go humane. And in that process, they were supposed to find legitimate rescues and shelters to adopt animals out through their store. What ended up happening and what caused us to work with the Attorney General and have a phenomenal podcast with Sony Productions, we found an Iowa dog broker who got their 501c3 status federally. They got a state licensed status in Iowa as a rescue dealer, because in Iowa we don't have like a separate rescue license. You're just a dealer. And so this dealer, this real broker, got a secondary dealer license as a rescue. And they were selling puppies to Chicago that had a ban and to California that had a ban. And because of how diligently we look at all these records all the time, they even changed their name. They were called Hobo Canine Rescue. We started noticing the signature was the same. And I was like, that's Jolyn Nothi. Like, that's a puppy mill owner. Why is she signing rescue CVIs? We had to track down that hundreds of puppies and then thousands of puppies were being sold across the country as fake rescue dogs. And we labeled it puppy laundering, sham rescues. It became this thing that was happening in California. But even though we flagged it as an issue, and I think the Chicago Tribune helped write about it in Illinois, nothing happened. Lawmakers weren't excited to jump in and do something. Like, we had to join the Animal Legal Defense Fund and sue those stores that we have found to be in violation of the state law. We had to do that. That was not the state of California. And so we won. Those stores closed. And at this moment, I think we only know of like one place that's kind of operating online with a storefront in California.
Yeah. So still a pet store technically in California. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. But that's something that we saw go from, gosh, I don't even know at the beginning of all of this how many pet stores California had, because it's a huge state. But now there are none there. And so a new law had to be passed to firm up that language. So now it has to be a legitimate nonprofit, a legitimate rescue, yada, yada. And I think the wording is something like who doesn't pay for the puppies or doesn't reimburse for the puppies themselves or something. So now there's like a monetary part in there. So fast forward to 2020, and Bailing Out Benji is doing a transport study. We're like, okay, everyone should be shut down right now. No one should be getting puppies across the country. Why are puppy mills still exporting puppies from Iowa? And where are they going?
Into California.
Into California.
Yeah.
And so we started tracking that, and we started realizing hundreds of puppies were going to California with these health documents, health records that didn't have real names, didn't have real phone numbers, didn't have real addresses. They were fake destinations that some of Iowa's worst puppy mills were sending puppies to. 30, 40, 50 at a time. And we're like, clearly something is going on. So we're raising the flag. We're trying to get our colleagues in this space to help because they have more resources. And it wasn't until the LA Times got involved. And we'll do a whole episode on that. But we essentially flagged that now it's illegal brokers selling through websites, through Craigslist, through Facebook, through all of these different means. But it's still Iowa puppy mills going right over to California. CD sellers, however we want to call them. They're online sellers, they're in-person sellers. The problem still exists.
Yeah, that puppy mill, the pet store pipeline seems to be a bit bigger than pet store with the brokers. Yeah.
So circling back to something you said, now there's no pet stores in California. There's pet stores. They're not pet stores selling dogs and cats.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So legislation passed saying pet stores can't sell dogs and cats from breeders. The breeders pivot and become false rescues and sell. And now they can't do that. So we pass more legislation, or we update, we fix it to say, here's stipulations. Now these fake sham rescues can't do this anymore. Now we're seeing those breeders, same breeders who are selling to the stores who can't anymore, same breeders who disguise themselves as rescues to sell to the stores who can't anymore. Same breeders now are going online.
Yeah, they're partnering with sellers in California who aren't reputable, and in the LA
online
Times
sellers,
yeah,
because they can't do the stores anymore.
So
now
they're
that's
posting.
their route.
There's like a website over there called Kijiji, Kiiji, I think is what it is. Like Craigslist, Facebook, like they're selling online, but also meeting the people in parking lots to sell the puppy. Right? It's all the red flags we say. Don't buy a puppy in a parking lot from someone you don't know. That's what's happening there, and it's not just there. That same horrific seller we're seeing in Iowa, that puppy mill, he is selling to fake addresses in Illinois and Florida. So it's not that it's California. It's the fact that this process is happening right now and we are seeing it, and there is no good way to stop it if the fix is just a pet store. The focus.
So. And that's, I guess, we're going to name this like the pitfalls of legislation. And that's the hard part, is as the research behind this, we get to see the after effects of this legislation. And whereas people thought maybe this was the solution to ending the puppy mill pipeline, we've seen that people get really crafty when we're not careful about the language, when we just focus on one avenue, that being pet stores. They get really creative, start selling to people's garages and finding little ways to go around that. So I guess the main efforts that people are putting into for these bans, or at whether it's at the local level or at the state level, we're seeing a little bit that it's not quite working. I guess too, I don't know if we want to jump into other states of examples or keep talking about California.
I was going to say that we essentially learned from our mistakes over and over and over again, but it's always after the fact. And a lot of it's because we kind of we use a copy and paste version of a law. And it is something that, one organization drafted, their legal team drafted, everyone pretty much adopts the same type of legislation, and it doesn't work in every scenario. And so we started seeing that in California. And so then as this issue progressed across cities, we were able to, look at the loophole language in, major cities. So we didn't see any rescues accidentally selling puppy mill puppies, right? An unintended consequence or intended consequence was that one county in Florida did some kind of sourcing law. And we'll talk about that too. But that basically was that the businesses in that county, not just stores, could not buy breeders or puppy mill dogs. They could not buy from breeders with violations. Well, there was a rescue there who was going to a dog auction and buying a lot of dogs from breeders, and they did get in trouble and they did get fined because the county had a sourcing law saying that wasn't allowed by businesses and animal businesses in that county. So it's a weird, like, you see how other states and counties start to adopt it,
Yeah.
but we don't always see all of the unintended consequences. Like, maybe there are people who are mad that rescues are also getting looped into that law, right? So it's like, how do we fine tune things enough that we don't see these issues popping up?
Yeah, or that we maybe take a pause, analyze how like our legislation is basically coming out in effect, and then like change strategies a little bit, because I do think that's something that's lacking, and something I think that causes a little bit more pressure on our organization, because we're the only ones that seem to be like focusing on that and trying to have these conversations. And maybe if some of the bigger organizations just like slowed down a little bit, which I understand it might be hard because like we always do the comparison of like these national organizations are more like corporations and we're small business, so they're kind of like a machine that can't pivot easily, but we're small and we can pivot easily. But
when you are that big organization, like
Mhm.
you in a large part control the narrative,
yeah,
and that's a responsibility.
yeah,
And so even if you can't pivot as fast as other organizations, don't you have a responsibility to make sure that the messaging is on point, right?
yeah.
And that's probably a topic for another day, but
Mhm.
No, and it's not just the messaging, it's what you said where like we pass a law and we kind of move on, right? So what bailing out Benji doesn't do is move on. Like we continue researching in that state.
Yeah.
We continue our research no matter what, and then the research tells us what we are seeing. And so I think that's a big misstep that we are not acknowledging in this space, is that it is okay to say, hey, we did make a mistake in California. The first time we wrote that law, there was a loophole, right? Acknowledging when you've messed up and then fixing it for the future is a big part of this. But when they use the copy and paste version is the biggest problem. So like Illinois was one of the largest, and I mean, it was huge. The effort to pass the Illinois state bill was hundreds of advocates on the ground. It was organizations working together. Everyone wanted to make Illinois go humane.
Yeah.
That bill the language wasn't necessarily tweaked to Illinois code. They didn't go in and dive in and see how breeders and pet stores are labeled and licensed in that state. And so because of that, there was an unintended consequence, a loophole, like some of us call it, a way for the stores to continue existing at the end of the day. And we ended up seeing stores that instead of closing, they just got a dealer license.
Yeah.
And now they are dealers, which is, I mean, by definition, yes, they're buying and reselling other people's puppies, so they are dealers.
Yeah.
And that's the frustrating part, is we're mad. Everyone's mad. And they're like, why are they allowed to do this? Well, it's because advocates didn't do their homework. We, our lobbyists, our legislators, whoever wrote that bill, they weren't looking deeply at the code and what it all actually meant. So now there's a loophole in that state that has to be fixed again. And it's just like we're seeing this pattern over and over and over again. And to us, it's kind of that waste of resources almost. Like everyone spent so much time, and everyone celebrated. And then what happened? The stores to this day, 2 years later, are still selling.
Yeah. And it almost seems like in the California example specifically, and I'm sure in others, but in California, it almost seems like that legislation worsened the problem, because if we have people selling through stores, at least they're visible and we can track that, right? We can see that. But by driving that underground, now we've got fake names, we've got online dealers, we've got everything's kind of happening in the shadows where it's much harder to keep track of. So like not only was the legislation ineffective, it also maybe made the problem a little bit worse. And so to your point, I think there's a tendency of like, there's a public outcry and people want something done. And then you can pass something like this and be like, look, we did this, and then move on. And no one in the public is really watching what happens next. And we are, and we're like, hello, that did not work, but it's still a check mark in the victory column for the legislators. And I know, like, I've heard at tabling events where we'll talk about, just talking about puppy mills in general, and people will come over and they're like, no, I thought they passed legislation. No, they outlawed puppy mills in New York. Like, Yeah, it's that's definitely what you heard. But the effect has been this, and that's the piece that doesn't get followed up on. That's the messaging that doesn't get out there, and it is hard to say this thing that we worked so hard on backfired.
Yeah.
But to take that information and then use it in doing future legislation is the responsible thing to do. Not to just keep copying and pasting that same scenario that we now know is not working.
Yeah.
Well, and now that we know what we know, right? Bailing out Benji 10 years later after the California bill was even being discussed, we now know that California doesn't even have licensing for breeders.
Yeah.
Like, I can be the first to tell you, when I started bailing out Benji, I didn't know that. I knew Iowa stuff, and that was about it. So, like, even working on pet store stuff, I wasn't necessarily, and puppy mill stuff, right? I wasn't necessarily educating myself on what every state needs, what every state's quirks are, and the nuances of every state. And so, California, when we're addressing quote unquote puppy mills, I think our focus should be state licensing for breeders. Why are we not at least registering them? Let's get a list of who they are, because that will, we know with puppies.com and all of the other online research we're doing that, like, California and states that appear to have no licensed breeders have a high volume of unlicensed breeders. And so could that California bill initially had a better effect if it also included some kind of registration or licensing for breeders? Like, when we're talking about ending puppy mills, like, we think that that should be more of a focus, because how do we know what we don't know?
Yeah. It is, like, good to have eyes on them too, because I mean, stopping the puppy mill pipeline, if you stop pet stores, like, yeah, it does kind of go underground because there's no longer eyes on that. And then if we also have a state that, like, doesn't even regulate breeders, and they're like, we essentially know nothing anymore from that state, and so it's very hard to even monitor anything. And so we do get more attention on, like, the Midwest states that do have regulations and licensing, and we can look at their violations. But yeah, states like California, Florida, big states with lots of people, with a lot of online sellers, they don't get looked at. And so it's very hard for us as, like, a research group too, to, like, say, hey, exactly what's happening in here, or what's happening, like, puppy mill wise. Because I mean, the talking point has just been ending the puppy mill pipeline, and that's, like, into the state, but not what's happening in the state. So yeah, it's just hard because it does seem like some of these legislative actions are just very focused on one aspect, whereas, like, we're really trying to look at the system of things and what's the cause and effect, and, like, really figure out what the scope of this puppy mill issue is. And I think a lot of people have been so hung up on pet stores for so long, they think that that's what the puppy mill issue is. But, like, our online work is showing it's a bigger problem than just pet stores. So when we're just passing legislation that's more targeted towards pet stores and not exactly towards, like, regulating breeders, there's a lot that goes unnoticed and a lot that goes unlooked at. And we may seem to think that, like, there are more victories, but really in the shadows, there's a bit more going on than what we think.
Right. And so, like, the biggest victory we've all celebrated, quote unquote, celebrated lately was New York going into effect. And that's something that we adjacently worked on. We were not a part of the official coalition of organizations working on it, although our research was there at the table. We saw that bill, everybody worked on it, and then it was supposed to go into effect in 1 year. And then Governor Hochul gave all of the pet stores an additional year, essentially to make sure that they could comply with going humane or finding partners or whatever. Well, in December, most of the stores closed. And when we posted on Facebook about it, we acknowledged, like, hey, we all worked really hard on this bill. It just went into effect. We can celebrate, but also keep in mind, people did lose their jobs. And we, of course, had some people who were like, oh, yeah, we get it. That is hard. And other people were like, well, they deserve it because they work for puppy mills. And so we still have some work to do on that. But here we are 9 months, 9 months later. And we are not seeing that stores have closed, actually.
No, once again, we see that they've gotten crafty, or that they have evolved. We'll say they evolved with the situation, because now we do see, like, kind of with Illinois, there are pet stores that have remained open, but they're doing appointment-based puppy sales, essentially. So that seems to be another way that they're getting around it. And then we saw on the flip side too, some pet stores did close, but they went to the online market. And so they advertise now like, hey, our like location is closed, but we're selling online now. So it's like that brokering, once again, that brokering problem into like states. And it's like, well, we passed this legislation that should have ended the puppy mill pipeline, but then characters evolve in a state, and it doesn't seem like we've fully gotten to that goal of pet stores not selling, which is still like
consumers still have access
Yes.
to breeders with and without violations
Yes.
because the pet stores evolved or found a loophole or whatever language you want to use. The pet stores found a way. Life always finds a way, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And so that's what we're facing. It's just, it seems like whack-a-mole sometimes.
Yeah, kind of like just breaks into more pieces as you go, and then we're trying to gather up all the pieces to gather all the information. And now it is a little bit more like they're not in that spotlight, and so it's a bit harder to say like, hey, this pet store is sourcing from these bad breeders, because like, well, now we have to get really crafty about how we're looking at them rather than just like, oh, CVI tracing, because like on a CVI we could see the pet store name, and now we're gonna have to like look for a certain like address that keeps popping up, a certain name that keeps popping up, and so it does kind of make our work a little harder, which we're very excited to do, but it does seem like it, I don't know, it creates a little bit more work when we haven't fully fleshed out the legislation that we're passing. And so maybe it's time to maybe pause and look at what we're doing and maybe turn to sourcing then, because if our goal is to end puppy mills, shouldn't we be more concerned about like who is selling and like what type of quality facility they have, rather than, as we've said, like where they're sourcing to.
That leads to my question that's been bouncing in my head for a minute now. So why, if we have a puppy mill problem, we don't have a pet store problem, we have a puppy mill problem. Why do you suppose the legislation is focused on pet stores and not puppy mills? If we all say we have a puppy mill problem, it's like, why do you identify the problem? Like, Mindy's the problem. Alexis, I need to discipline you. Like, what? So why are they not going to the puppy mills?
So great question. Truly, bans worked when they needed to. So like back in, 20 years ago, people have been selling puppies in pet stores since like the 60s, right? Like you walk into Sears and they used to have puppies in stores.
I bought one.
Yeah, we were talking about that. You had said you had never bought a dog, and then you had this flashback of
my first dog. Yeah, totally. Bought it at a pet store at the mall.
Yeah, and it was like $200. You said it wasn't even
$60.
$60. Yeah.
Yes, I don't know what the deal was. He was a
but
run.
That's because especially back then, it was likely more local people who were selling their puppies through the local outlet that they had.
Yeah, and I was at one of our events and we were talking about that, and I don't remember who I was with, but similar generation as myself, and said the same thing. They're like, oh yeah, I got a dog at a pet store that was like 100 or less. Like they were not thousands of dollars. This would be like early 90s, late 80s, early 90s. Yeah, it was. Yeah, so very different scenario.
Right. And so what we saw from the public side is that now the demand for puppies was there. More people were going to those stores to ask for puppies. And then the stores had to decide, how can we get more volume? Right? So it can't just be the local. And so they did start. And I should say, there are some stores. There was like a chain of stores called Pet Doctors. They had over 300 stores in the early 2000s. They were buying from a lot of unsatisfactory players, right? I don't know enough at this time to call them puppy mills, but I assume it was a very unregulated time.
Yeah.
And then as advocates and organizations started seeing this growing problem of pet stores that did not care, they were buying from the worst of the worst. I mean, the breeder I can't stop talking about, I'm going to get his like name tattooed on my heart. Like he and I are bonded forever.
I'm going to definitely not allow that.
This is the second time on this show you've told me I can't get a tattoo.
Yeah, no, I will. I will be the block.
I know.
Bad
but
choice.
we do talk about him a lot because he is, and we have some plans to talk about really how big his presence is in this world.
Yeah.
But it's people like that who pre 2016, this breeder, Stonehenge Kennels, was on every CVI. He did not care that he had direct violations. He did not care that he had critical violations. His name used to be on the CVI selling to every pet store, and we could track it. Well, then all of these organizations, all of these states started paying attention. So we saw bans passing, and then we saw states getting a little more creative and looking at sourcing laws. So to your point, pet stores and puppy mills were a problem, and they still are. They still are, right? Like there's an issue. But that problem has shrunk now. In the early 2000s, there was not puppies.com. There was not the internet. We were not going to that for everything.
Yeah.
People are literally using AI for as a therapist, right? We were just talking about this. Like people go to the internet for everything.
Yep.
This is a growing problem we should have predicted, but instead we kept the focus on the shrinking problem because our work was working. And so we were seeing more of the problems shrink. We've seen the USDA licensed breeder number go from 6,000 down to like 2,500-ish now, dog and cat. And so we've seen over the last few years, this whole industry kind of shrinking. So it looks like success. When you take one step back and you just look at the online or just the unlicensed, we are seeing that California has thousands, Florida hundreds, if not thousands. Like there's so many breeders we don't know about that are selling in unsavory ways, that are keeping animals in unsatisfactory conditions, unsafe conditions, and there's nothing we can do because we don't have eyes on them. And so when we're talking about sourcing laws, Connecticut's a decent example. And again, it's a pitfall thing, right? So we learn and we grow better.
Yeah.
When stores like Petland wanted to say, hey, let's slow down the bans. We heard you. Let's slow down the bans. And I can't say for sure, anecdotally, that the pet industry, the pet store industry, led the sourcing part of laws. So we've got advocates leading the way on bans, and we've got the pet stores, for the most part at the beginning, leading the way on sourcing. And this is basically saying that a pet store in Connecticut or Arizona, because they also have a sourcing law, they can't buy from breeders with direct violations. That each state has it worded a little differently. But essentially it's saying, if you're buying from a USDA breeder, they can't have these kinds of violations or you get a fine. The positives there is that it does cut out some of the worst players. The worst players cannot sell directly into their state. We'll say that for now. But also, and I just lost my train of thought because I want to go off on the directly part. I'll just go with my directly part.
I have a question if that helps.
No, I remembered. But do you want to ask your question? Okay.
Go.
So yeah, you've got the people who can't sell directly, but then you also have, oh my God, I lost it again. Ask me your question. I truly had it. And then I was like, nope, it's not.
So the pet stores were in favor of the sourcing laws.
As a last resort.
As a compromise.
Yes, as a compromise. It keeps
right?
them in business.
Yes.
It
so
shows good faith.
Let's don't do a ban. Let's do a sourcing law. We will not buy from people with USDA violations.
Yes. So USDA, thank you. That is where my mind was going, because these sourcing laws are very, very, very creatively written, and they only focus on federal. So as we are watching the USDA license list shrink and shrink every year, and we are seeing more breeders cleaning up their act, specifically some of the breeders who are trying to sell through stores. We've talked a lot about that, right? There are some breeders who breed on the commercial scale trying. However, all of these stores are written that we're only looking at federal and no one is looking at the state level. And that's because even the national humane, quote unquote, organizations, the animal welfare organizations, weren't looking at state violations. And so there was a loophole, right? So now the person like Missouri, we reported earlier this year, Missouri only had 3% of the violations, or 3% of their breeders had violations. That was on the USDA level. When we started looking at state, it climbed.
It did. I think
skyrocketed.
It went up to over 60%.
Is that because there are more state licensed breeders, or is it because the state requirements are more stringent?
The latter.
Okay.
And so that's why, as we are all, especially us, we're trying to look at state level stuff. We're trying to make state level stuff stronger. Right now, the only sourcing laws that are passed talk about USDA. And it's like, but why? There's so much more to it. You are missing a huge chunk of the information you could have access to.
I just thought it was interesting too, because we always talk about how like USDA standard, federal standard is like the minimum standard, and that's why states needed to write their own to bolster those. And so it's like, if that's our talking point, why aren't we also pressuring it onto them to look at the state inspection reports if those are stronger standards? And that's what, like, I don't know, we want the goals to achieve. Yeah.
And in Connecticut, do you want to ask your question, Gwen?
Oh, yeah.
Well, and maybe it doesn't have an answer. Is there a pathway to strengthen the USDA regulations, or is it intentionally broad because things vary so differently between the states, and so they keep it high level with the hope that the states are going to meet their needs? Or
I think it's the government doing what the government does, and the regulations on the federal level haven't been updated since the 60s, but everyone and their dog has been filing federal legislation for years to try to get something passed. And so there's right now there's
so there is an effort to strengthen those USDA laws.
Yeah.
Okay.
There have been bills, but there's been bills like in Congress for a decade. And we have to think too, like, what's easiest to pass? I think like localities easier than state, but state is easier than federal. And so it's like, if you have issues you want to address, it's probably at your locality level or your state level, it's going to pass quicker.
And right now, past year has really opened our eyes a lot to the importance of collaboration and working together with the other side when talking about these issues specifically. So even on the federal level, we're pushing for the Puppy Protection Act and Goldie's Act, and like they all have names, we all know the names, like everyone is like pushing for these things, but the breeders are fighting those things. And it's, even if they believe in some of the language and they believe in the why, it is a hard line, us versus them. And so the lawmakers are hearing that. And when you're talking, and of course we talk about, I mean, when we're talking about inspectors, we have talked about how every 4 years there's an upheaval. You've got a new boss. It's hard. The same goes for lawmakers. And when you are at the mercy of passing laws that are for the agenda at the moment, for the party at the moment, whatever that looks like, animal welfare is not the priority. Like those laws very rarely get attention. And so, they get refiled every single year, and they're important and they need to pass. But maybe there's a reason why they haven't. And maybe we should look at that strategy and say, how can we bring other people to the table on the other side to sit down with the USDA and say, hey, here's what we're all thinking. Is there some kind of legislation or maybe rules? We can pass it through rules making. I mean, there's so many other things we can do. But when we're talking about lobbying, you get to lobby every year. You get to fundraise off of that every single year. You get to, it's just an ongoing fight that happens all the time. And so sometimes I question, is it the fight or the mission that's keeping people going, right? Is it they're so used to that strategy of fighting at the Capitol, have they lost sight of maybe the clearest path forward or something? I don't quite know, but hopefully that answered a little bit. Like, people are working on this, like you said, Alexis, county, city to federal.
It just seems to me that if we had a good federal law, and I know that's a whole thing in this country, like I find myself often like, are we the United States or are we 50 countries? Like, to me, my brain should always go like federal legislation. Like, why can the states do whatever they want? And it's different if I literally cross my street into another state, then there's a different rule. And like, that to me sounds like different countries. And so anyway, that's a whole other topic.
That's an America problem.
Right. And I mean, we are unique in that, that's the great experiment, right? And so to me, it always falls back to like one solid governing body. It feels so much easier than 50 or not even 50, because a lot of states don't even have licensing laws. And so you're like dealing with all of these different things, and it's not, to me, super state specific. Like, it's not a Missouri problem or a Nevada problem or a California problem. Like, it's the country. It's the whole country is the problem.
And it's also interconnected, but we do it whack-a-mole style and patchwork style. And Nevada, great example. Nevada is a state that had less than 10 pet stores when I first started bailing out Benji. I'm pretty sure it was like a few in the Reno area, Well, no, not less than 10. My God, they have way more
There
than
we-
that
yeah, I
now.
was like,
You're looking
there's
at me like I'm
Vegas.
crazy.
So I was like,
No,
I was thinking
fact
of
check.
Vegas
Yeah.
alone.
Yeah, no, thank you for real life fact checking me. No, like the Reno area had
Mhm.
less than 10,
Yeah,
excuse me.
yeah.
Vegas has always had so many, that
Yeah,
area.
yeah.
But Nevada is a state that basically has like 3 cities. You've got Reno, Carson up north, and you've got Vegas in the south.
And Vegas is a whole thing.
Vegas is a whole
Like,
thing.
that's a whole
That's a
thing.
whole thing. But the rest is desert. The rest is lots of land that people can do lots of things, right?
Yeah.
And so we see a lot of breeders selling online in Vegas. Or not just Vegas, but Nevada doesn't have breeder laws, right? And so again, that's an example of we are working on ending puppy mills in Nevada by passing bans on stores, but no one is paying attention to, hey, maybe we should try to get breeders to be registered, or
Yeah.
maybe we should try to get them to be licensed. And there's a difference. I want to differentiate. Registering means maybe just get them to register with the state, put their name on a list.
We know they
There's
exist.
not licensing
Yeah.
and registration and
Mhm.
inspections yet,
Mhm.
right? I prefer that there is a Department of Agriculture or that kind of entity that
Yeah.
inspects and has regulations, but baby steps. So
Mhm.
maybe in these huge states, we start with registries and we pass a law that requires, if you're selling puppies, just tell the state that you're doing it.
Mhm.
So that's it. It's the patchwork. It's what are the real ramifications of the bills we are working on and the ordinances we
Yeah.
are working on. And we're not telling anyone like ordinances necessarily don't work, right? Because like there are problematic stores in cities
Yeah.
that hurt humans, hurt animals. Like it's not a good scenario.
Yeah.
But could a sourcing law have fixed that? Or anti-predatory financing laws? Like there's so many different things that we have problems with in a pet store that maybe we could have focused on those differently to still have the same intended goal of shutting off the cruelest market.
Yeah, absolutely. And like we're trying to think a little bit ahead, like or just what type of effects might happen if I do this thing. Like that might help a little bit.
Thank you all so much for tuning in to this week's episode. This conversation was so fun that it actually ran a little long, and we decided to cut it into 2 parts. So it might feel like an abrupt stop today. So just get excited for next week's episode, where we dive into part 2 of Laws and Pitfalls. Thanks, everyone. We'll talk to you next week.